Welcome to the Macdownunder Podcast for all Australian Apple computer enthusiasts and collectors.
Welcome to episode 42 of the Macdownunder Podcast. I'm Justin and thanks for joining me again today. I see that last week's episode about infrared networking that Apple implemented was pretty popular compared to previous episodes, so I hope you really liked it. And again, thanks for coming back for today's episode. So today I'm going to look at Apple's implementation of Wi-Fi technology. We'll also cover our regular collecting news, coming events, and some for sale finds. And gee, there's lots of Apple Wi-Fi devices for sale around at the moment, and some of them are pretty cheap too. So on to today's episode. The development of Wi-Fi. Who invented Wi-Fi? Gee, it still seems to be quite a controversial subject, and several countries have really got a big investment in the conversation. So, in 1989, Australia's CSIRO, Go Australia, invented the wireless LAN and patented it. However, throughout the 80s and up to early 91, in the Netherlands, NCR and AT&T, the American company but working in the Netherlands, developed WaveLAN and the early establishment of the 802.11 Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers standard, the IEEE standard. But even America reckon their people got onto the bandwagon as early as World War II. And if you've read the notes, you'll know already that Hedy Lamarr and George Antheil in the USA during World War II invented a system for radio frequency hopping. But it was specifically designed for guided missile technology. There was no suggestion that they'd send packet data or the internet in World War II. So I think that's a bit of a stretch because skipping frequency technology is used in a whole range of fields, not just Wi-Fi. However, without their contribution, no doubt things would have been more difficult. However, there was a landmark court case where the CSIRO actually got awarded damages and costs in a license suit. So it looks like the CSIRO are at least the legal inventors. So in 1997, the first 802.11 standard was released. That was version A with a throughput of 2 megabits per second. In 1999, the Wi-Fi Alliance formed, and it was really to copyright the Wi-Fi name and use it as a commercial product. And that involved a whole lot of companies. Now, Wi-Fi is short for wireless fidelity. It's not really talking about the technology other than in descriptive terms. And according to what I've read, it was chosen to link it to the audio hi-fi and the idea of a premium quality in audio, premium quality in wireless networking. So that's where the name came from, apparently. So on to Apple's history. In 1998, so a little while later, Steve Jobs, when he was the interim CEO for Apple, met with the executives from Lucent Technologies. Now, Lucent, I've since found out, is actually a subgroup of AT&T, so that Netherlands group that were involved in developing the standard. And they discussed the idea of developing a radio card for Apple's laptops. They were going to call it the AirPort card. So, here we are. The AirPort card was introduced by Steve Jobs on the 21st of July 1999 at Macworld Expo. And he introduced it as a one more thing after having debuted the new clamshell iBook G3. And he did it in a really interesting way. He went over to the clamshell, started browsing the internet whilst it was on the desk, and just picked the laptop up and started walking across the stage to thunderous applause. And he said, "Oh, did you notice something?" And then, like a magician, got a hula hoop out and waved it around the laptop to prove there were no wires attached. It's quite an interesting video if you want to have a look at it. In fact, there's a couple of quirky things in that particular Expo plenary session, so definitely worth having a look at. So the iBook G3 became the world's first laptop with dedicated Wi-Fi hardware built in. The card was still an option though. The antennas were integrated into the displays of the iBooks on either side of the screen, and it was advertised at 11 megabits per second, so this was the 802.11b standard, and even in the plenary they suggested a range of 150 feet or 47 metres. Later, of course, the AirPort card would work with the slot load version of the iMac G3, but you needed a circuit board adapter for that. And the last version of the PowerBook G3, the Pismo, also had an AirPort slot. It wasn't available until the second version of the Power Mac G4, the Sawtooth AGP model, and it was added to all the products except the Xserve, either as an option or built in from 2005. Anyway, about the card itself. This original model, simply known as the AirPort card. Now, thanks to Matt from the Mac Museum, rather than pulling my laptops apart, he quite kindly loaned me the AirPort card. But what he reminded me was that in Japan, a company called IOData, who were into wireless networking, had already trademarked the AirPort name. So in Japan, it became known as the AirMac. And so having a look online, all of the products that I'm going to talk about today in Japan have AirMac on them rather than AirPort. So back to the card. This card is identical to the Lucent Waveland Orinoco Gold PC card. So it's a PCM CIA card. The only difference from the Orinoco card is the section where the antenna would normally be has been cut out, and instead there's the connector for the internal antenna from the iBook. It's also been adjusted so that it will only go into the AirPort slot. You can't plug it into a standard PCM CIA slot, even though electrically it's compatible, and that was apparently to prevent the cheaper AirPort card being used instead of Lucent's own Waveland card in PCM CIA slots. But what about a base station? Well, at the same 1999 Macworld Expo, Apple launched the original AirPort base station in the UFO shape. And at the expo and in the advertising, they really leaned into the UFO shape. So if you have a look at the ads of the time, in fact, they're part of the expo video, so it's worth watching that video. It's a bit grainy because of its age, but pretty good. A very cute ad where they had the AirPort appearing as a UFO flying through the air. And if you can see the ports and the curve, made me think of a smiley face as it's flying through the air, given we hadn't seen it before. Rotated around to show you the Apple logo as it landed. So it really lent into the idea of the UFO and being wireless in space. Very cute videos and ads. So what about this particular product? So again, it was released in 1999. It was at the Wi-Fi standard of 802.11b, same as the cards. So that's 2.4 gigahertz. And 11 megabits per second. So inside it, we've also got the Lucent Waveland Silver PC card for radio. So if you remember, the AirPort card was the gold card. This is the Lucent Waveland Silver card. And in fact, being a Newton user, a lot of Newton users at the time were told to crack this one open, or suggested, crack this open, get out the silver card and put it in your Newton to use your Newton for Wi-Fi. I didn't do that, this one's still intact. So, what interfaces has it got? Well, on the back, it's got a phone connector because it's got a 56K dial-up modem. Pretty useless these days, nevertheless it was there. There's the RJ45 for 10 base T Ethernet to connect to your network or to a ADSL modem. And the power connector, and on the bottom, there's a reset pin. Of course, on the front, we've got the status lights. Now, security on this. This is using 40-bit WEP. That's the wired equivalent privacy encryption. So hopelessly insecure by today's standards, which used a 10-digit hex key or 5-character ASCII key. So you definitely couldn't use this in today's society. You would get hacked well and truly. It was before the days of the MIMO antenna arrays, so single antenna. It could connect to up to 10 devices concurrently, and it was model number M7601. So I bought one of these back in the day and had it connected into my Ethernet network at home, and it was my foray into Wi-Fi for the couple of devices that I had at the time, including my Newton. Now, Apple released a second AirPort base station in 2001. So this was a generation 2 of the original AirPort. It came in the snow white colour to match the G4 iMac and other devices of the time. And it was pretty much identical in all components, except that model came with dual Ethernet, and one of those was a 100 base TX Ethernet output. So the only real difference, apart from the change of colour, was the dual Ethernet with the addition of a 100 base TX Ethernet port. Fast forward to 2003, and Apple updated AirPort to AirPort Extreme. And here's a sample of the AirPort Extreme card that was available. Again, thanks to Matt at the Mac Museum for loaning me one of these so I didn't have to pull my computers apart. So AirPort Extreme was based on the 802.11g standard. So this increased the speed up to 54 megabits per second, and of course was backward compatible with 802.11b. So having one of these cards could connect to either network. So this is a Broadcom chipset. So they've moved away from Lucent, and in fact they've stayed with Broadcom pretty much for the rest of the AirPort line. So it's a custom form factor card, but as you can probably tell from the end, it's electrically compatible with the Mini PCI standard. It was user installable, and it was an option for the 2003 aluminium form factor G4 PowerBooks, the 2003 USB 2 version of the G4 iMac, the G4 iBook, and the 2003 mirror drive door PowerMac G4, but only the model that had FireWire 800, which was a slightly later edition. There was no option for it still on the Xserve, but I had an Xserve at the time, a G4 Xserve, and in fact I had a Lucent PCI card plugged into the G4 Xserve with a big, thick, stubby antenna sticking out the top of the server to connect into the home network. So that was my workaround. So in terms of later integrations, after this card, there was a different version of it in the last version of the PowerPC based PowerBooks and iBooks. And the major difference with this card, not only did it do Wi-Fi, but it also did Bluetooth. Now this was not user installable, so it came pre-installed, and again was a custom form factor with the same Mini PCI interface. And from mid-2005, AirPort Extreme was pretty much incorporated in all the product lines except for the PowerMac G4 and the Mac Pro, where it remained an option. So there must have been an AirPort Extreme base station, right? Well, there was. And here's the first version of that. Again, still in the UFO style, in white. And this time they added a silver Apple logo. The previous one was clear. So this was released in 2003 alongside the card. Again, it's the 802.11g standard at 54 megabits per second. Not only did they update the speed, but they updated the security in the AirPort Extreme base station. So the WEP key was upgraded from a 40-bit key to a 128-bit key. So that was a 26-digit hex code or 13 ASCII characters. Mind you, again, today, easily hacked. so don't use it. But that was the upgrade. But more importantly, they introduced the Wi-Fi protected access security system as well, which was much more secure at the time, not so much now. But major security upgrades. Now, the other thing that was upgraded was its capacity. So no longer 10 devices, the AirPort Extreme base station could connect to 50 devices. On the back, it has provision for power. It has a USB port, which was for print sharing. It still came with a modem option. And it came with two Ethernet ports, one for your LAN and one for your DSL modem if you needed it, the reset key, and a connection for an external antenna. So that was the original AirPort Extreme base station. But with the same model number, they released a separate version that didn't have the telephone connection. And if you remember back to when we were talking about modems, trying to coordinate across the world to meet phone standards as well as wireless networking standards, I can understand why there was a cheaper version with no phone connection. Now in 2004, Apple released an upgraded version of this, almost identical, but the main difference being that the Ethernet port for your wireless LAN had power over Ethernet. So if your ADSL modem provided power, it could power this modem or vice versa. So that was in 2004. Again, there were two versions of that model, one with the phone connector and one without the phone connector. In 2007, Apple updated the AirPort Extreme base station again, and we got this new form factor which matches the early Mac Mini footprint. Now, they released 5 versions in this series. I'm missing one, and I have one factory sealed in box. Given they look identical, I have no intention of opening this box right at the moment. However, let me tell you about the 2007 version that came out first. So not only did we get the new form factor, but we also got a new standard. So the 2007 edition upgraded to the 802.11n Wi-Fi standard. So this introduced not only 2.4 gigahertz radio, but also 5 gigahertz radio, but it was an or. You could choose one or the other. But it did allow for 450 megabits per second. That's a significant upgrade from the 54 megabits per second of the previous model. We also got a security upgrade with this 2007 model. We now had WPA version 2, which is almost acceptable today, but there are better standards. The other thing that got upgraded was the antenna array got improved significantly. So this is the first time that we had a MIMO, a multiple input, multiple output array. So it was a 3x3, 3 inputs and 3 outputs with 2 concurrent data streams. So a MIMO of 3x3:2. On the back of the device, we also got an upgrade. So we have the power input, but the USB now not only allowed for print sharing, but allowed you to connect an external hard drive. So you were able to use AirPort disk mode and share your hard drive across the network. Of course, we have the 4 network ports and we have the reset button. So shortly after this model was released in 2007, a second update was released with exactly the same model number in exactly the same form factor. But the difference with this one was that the Ethernet ports were 1000 base T, so gigabit, and it upgraded the CPU. Now they both come with model number A1143. The only way I was able to tell the difference for today's show was to look up the serial numbers using everymac.com, and it did tell me that one was a version 1 and one was a version 2. You could do it if you connected it up to your Ethernet port and checked which one had gigabit, and potentially if you turned it on and connected to the AirPort app, you could check the info that way as well. But their serial numbers did it for me. Now, the third version of this form factor, I actually don't have. But with this third edition, we got a significant upgrade in the antenna array. So on this particular version, we got a MIMO of 2x2, so 2 input antennas and 2 output antennas with 2 concurrent data streams, but on each band. So we got 2x2 with 2 streams for 2.4 gigahertz and another set of arrays for 5 gigahertz. Later the same year, this bottom model was released. Again, they look identical, but this was the second release in 2009. So this was version 4 of this form factor. And its significant change was an upgrade to the antenna array. So the previous one was 2x2 with 2 streams. This is 3x3 with 3 streams per band. And the USB in this bottom one was now available for Time Machine, not only AirPort disk. The other significant difference is you could multicast across both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. So no longer were they separate transmissions, they were blended transmissions, which we're used to today. In 2011, this final version got released, and the only real difference in this final version was a change in the CPU to an ARM CPU. Now in 2013, Apple upgraded the AirPort Extreme again. Again, a new form factor, so the tower form factor, but the footprint was now the same as the Apple TV, fits perfectly. So this new version not only got a new case, but it got a new Wi-Fi standard. So it operates at 802.11ac, which allows a throughput of 1.3 gigabits per second. Again, a significant jump from the 450 megabits that the earlier models provided. It also increases security, and we now have access to WPA2 Enterprise Edition. And the other significant change was the ARM CPU was now a dual ARM CPU in this final version of the AirPort Extreme in 2013. Now, Apple had other products alongside the AirPort base stations. For example, in 2004, Apple released this, the Apple AirPort Express base station, although they dropped the base station title soon afterwards. So this came out in 2004, in the middle of that series of base stations we talked about before. So it operated at the 802.11g standard, the same as its predecessor base station at 54 megabits per second, and on the 2.4 gigahertz bandwidth. Where it changed, however, is this introduced the WPA2 standard earlier than the main base stations did. It also introduced the MIMO, multiple input, multiple output antenna array earlier as well. And this one came out with a 2x2 with 2 concurrent streams. It could only support 10 devices, so it was a bit lacking in that department. But its main feature was this 3.5 mini Toslink connector for AirTunes. So you could stream music to this, and it also included a Texas Instruments 16-bit audio chip. And that's exactly what I use this for. I use this one in my lounge room as an extender, a Wi-Fi extender, and I use the audio connector back into my stereo so I could play all of my iTunes music through my hi-fi stereo in the lounge room. It also comes with 100 base T and a USB port, allegedly to charge your iPod, but also allowed you to use it for print sharing. So that was the first version, the Walmart version, that came out in 2004. In 2008, they upgraded it. Now, this was some time later. So similar to the predecessor base station in 2008, this one ran at the 802.11n standard, so 450 megabits per second. It continued to use WPA2, but because it was on the N standard, this introduced 5 gigahertz radio as well. It had the same antenna array as its predecessor, It still only had a 100 base T Ethernet port, although the base stations had upgraded it at that time, and again could only support 10 devices. But it still had the 3.5 millimeter mini Toslink for AirTunes and the 16-bit Texas Instrument audio. So a significant upgrade to the earlier Woolwart. Then in 2012, Apple upgraded it again, but it also upgraded the form factor. So this is exactly the same dimensions as an Apple TV, and doesn't show up terribly well on screen, but does have a very faintly embossed Apple logo on the front. Now, the main difference with this version that came out in 2012 is it introduced the WPA2 Enterprise version of encryption, and it also allowed you to stream 2.5 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz concurrently. So again, it had that cross bandwidth capability, which the earlier models did not. It could now support 50 devices compared to the 10 of the earlier versions. But again, on the back, it had the gigabit Ethernet, which was standard at that point, and a USB connection. Now, the 3.5 millimeter Toslink now was also for AirPlay 1 and 2. So it could actually use AirPlay 1 and 2 and output to your stereo. So a significant upgrade for the AirPort Express in 2012. Now, the other product that Apple launched alongside the Apple AirPort base station was the Apple AirPort time capsules. Now, there were 4 in this new form factor, first starting in 2008. Now, the form factor is identical to the middle series Mac Minis, so the same as the M1 Mac Mini, in fact, because I checked it earlier today. So that was the new form factor, but again, 4 variations over a period of time in the same form factor with the same input outputs. So again, they're pretty much looking the same on the outside. However, this first one from 2008 was released after the second generation of the Square base station. It runs at the 802.11n standard, 450 megabits per second throughput, and WPA2 security. No changes there. It runs on 2.4 and 5 gigahertz concurrently. The main issue is it introduced the USB connection on the back that was compatible for Time Machine. So not only could you use the hard drive inside this for Time Machine, but the USB port could connect to an additional hard drive for Time Machine. But obviously we've got power, the USB, the 4 Ethernet ports, and the reset button. Now, this particular version of the Time Capsule could come with a 500 gigabyte or a 1 terabyte hard drive, and it was the serial ATA version. This second edition came out in 2009 alongside the third generation of the Square base station. It's identical in all of its statistics, the main difference being that it had the MIMO antenna array. It was the 2x2 with 2 concurrent streams, which was already in the base station at that time. The upgrade internally for this one, you could get this in a 1 terabyte, a 2 terabyte, or a 3 terabyte model. Later in 2009, this third one became available. So this came out alongside the 4th generation of the Square base station. Again, its statistics are pretty much identical. The main difference being the antenna array is now a MIMO 3x3 with 3 concurrent streams. And again, it had the same hard drive configuration as its predecessor, 1, 2, or 3 terabytes. All right, the last in this series at the bottom here came out in 2011 alongside the 5th generation Square base station. Again, its configuration is identical, and it had an internal 2 or 3 terabyte hard drive. Now, this box came from that particular drive, and I know that that's a 2 terabyte hard drive. And then in 2013, alongside the AirPort base station in this new form factor, there was a time capsule released in the identical form factor. So again, in the tall tower with the footprint matching the Apple TV. Now, pretty much like the base station, it introduced the 802.11ac standard with a 1.3 gigabits per second throughput with WPA2 enterprise security. It has a dual ARM CPU, the same as the base station, and internally it has a 2 or a 3 terabyte hard drive. Now, the easy way to tell the difference between this tower and the AirPort tower, because otherwise they're identical, the ports are the same, the form factor is the same, but this is a bit heavier because of the hard drive. So when you weigh the two of them together, it's easy to tell which one's the time capsule. Now, according to a number of sources online, in 2016, Apple reported through Bloomberg that they'd disbanded their wireless router division. And in 2018, according to online reports, 9to5Mac got an announcement that Apple had discontinued the AirPort line and was exiting from the consumer router market. However, Apple continue to provide Wi-Fi access into all of their products, as we know, through all the Mac series, through the iPod Touch, all iPod Touch, iPad and iPhones have Wi-Fi. Apple Watch Vision Pro, Apple TV, HomePod and HomePod Mini all use Wi-Fi. And more recently, we know that Apple have developed their own silicon N1 chip to handle Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. But what about Wi-Fi and Apple legacy products? Well, you won't find an Apple solution, but there are many talented hobbyists and third-party vendors that have a whole range of solutions to get your legacy hardware online through Wi-Fi. Even the Apple One has an interface card that's been developed to connect to Wi-Fi. The Apple II has a couple of solutions, including the ESP-based Apple II interface boards. The Apple II, III, the Lisa and early Macs and PowerBooks can all use things like the Y modem, the Wi-Fi 232 or FujiNet. The Apple Newton is capable of using a PCMCIA Wi-Fi card, and enthusiasts have written third-party Wi-Fi drivers to enable this. Even local talk now can be passed over Wi-Fi between machines using enthusiast products like AirTalk. And of course, there are USB, PCI and PCMCIA enabled Macs have plenty of commercial options with commercial drivers to make them work. Now, before I finish up our special segment on Wi-Fi, a big word of warning around security. I would only ever recommend to use the current standards for Wi-Fi security. And at the moment, at the time of recording, that's WPA3. And none of the products that I've shown today have WPA3. So I would not recommend using any of the Apple AirPort products in contemporary conditions. So please, user beware. So if you've got any of these Apple AirPort products in your collection, which ones do you have? I hope you're not using them, but if it's okay, let me know. And which one's your favourite? I like them all. I think they're really interesting. I particularly like the UFO. Let us know down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. On to recent news. And first up, over at Apple Fritter, Uncle Bernie, who does lots of projects for the Apple One, announced back on the 1st of April that he was resurrecting an old project to build a colour board for the Apple One. Well, he's just announced this week that he's got the final parts and components and installed them, and it works. Now, if you read the backstory, it's a good read. He always has a good read there. But it turns out that Woz did say that the Apple One was always intended to do colour, but he never got around to doing that final solution. Well, Uncle Bernie now does. But he is looking if people are interested to support the project. So if you've got an Apple One and you're interested in him producing these boards, let him know over at Apple Fritter, link down in the description. Also, another announcement I saw through Apple Fritter from JD Micro is FlexROM. Now the FlexROM is a replacement either for the 9316 ROM or the 2716 EEPROM in the Apple II. Now this includes the PalSoft ROM for the ITT 2020, which I'm looking for. So I suspect I'm going to be buying one of these. Great to see that this was designed in collaboration between Australia and the US. And for us here in Australia, I believe they might be available through the eBay Australia store soon. Links down in the description. On to coming events. First up, Retro Gaming Bendigo are going to hold their next meeting on Saturday, that's Saturday, the 13th of June, from 12 for a 12:30 start in the Huntley Memorial Hall. Next up, the Mac Museum. And again, thanks Matt for the loan of your AirPort cards for today's show. I hope they showed up nicely for you on the screen. And I visited Matt at the last open day last weekend. It was great to see lots of old faces, familiar faces, and lots of new faces and families as well. And they seem to really be enjoying themselves using the playing exhibits as well as looking over some of the static exhibits as well. Now, there's no update on the website for the next open day, but a little birdie told me it might have been in 5 weeks' time, which would maybe make that the 13th of June. Anyway, links down in the description. Watch the website to confirm the next open day. The Adelaide Retro Computing Group are holding their next meeting on Friday, the 12th of June, from 5:30 until 10:30 in the Unley Community Centre. The technology markets made this big post this week. So their next market is the 7th of June at the Darebin Sports Community Centre in Reservoir, and this is going to include a vintage collection market. And the following week, the 14th of June, they'll be at the Springers Leisure Centre in Keysborough. And WasFest, their next meeting for the Apple II enthusiasts is the 23rd of May in New South Wales. Again, held in a family home, so contact the organisers for details. Links down in the description. Now, if you've got a retro computing event or gathering that you'd like me to present here and promote on the channel, please let me know. I'd be happy to help out. Now, for this week's for sale items, everything's fairly cheap. There's one exception. And all easily available all over Marketplace and eBay. So I focused on eBay this week. So first up, we have the original AirPort wireless card, 11 megabits per second from New South Wales for only $10. Next up, we have the AirPort Extreme base station. This one's the square version with the 802.11n standard in Victoria for $11. Next, we have the Apple AirPort Express A1264. This is actually the second generation, not as advertised here. It's the second faster version in Victoria for $25. Next up, we have the last version of the Apple AirPort Extreme. This is the tower case with the same footprint as the Apple TV. So it's got 3 gigabit ports and operates at 802.11ac. So this is the very fast throughput. Now it's currently available for bidding at the time of the recording at $20 or buy it now for $50. Next up, there's an Apple AirPort Time Capsule, 500 gigabyte version. So this is the first version that they made in the ACT for $30. Next up, we have one of the UFOs. This is the Extreme version, A1034, in New South Wales for $58.88. Now, if you're looking to set up your AirPort collection, here's a bargain for you. A set of 4 AirPort routers and a time capsule. So 2 different Walmart AirPort Expresses, a time capsule and an AirPort Extreme. From Victoria, the lot for $58.64. Next up, we have the AirPort Express 802.11n router. Now, it's advertised as the second gen. It's actually the third gen in New South Wales for $69. Now, if you're into collecting the first version of things, the Apple AirPort base station first generation Graphite is available in box from New South Wales for $250. With shipping, that comes to $266.96. Now, I thought I'd just have to throw this in because I've been looking online for those that I'm missing. And in the USA, you can get the graphite version of the Apple AirPort UFO. No box, but with a US power supply for $34.10 American, which turns to $47.06 Australian. With shipping at about $40, this comes in at a total of $86.96. Well, that brings us to the end of episode 42 of the Macdownunder Podcast, looking at Apple's AirPort Wi-Fi systems. Please let me know what you thought down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Now, next week, I'm not quite sure, but we might do a wrap-up episode of all of Apple's networking with a bit of a timeline. Why don't you check in next week and find out? So, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. And until I see you next time, take care. Thank you for joining the Macdownunder Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you again soon.